A silence fell over the little girl, Lunar, a child whose world had been destroyed. 6 protectors, more than just dogs. They are her only connection to the world she lost. In the quiet, Lunar will learn to heal. Will the German shepherds protect her from the darkness? And together, will they find the light? Sedona was a small, peaceful town in the USA, where time seemed to slow and every corner held the gentle whisper of a calm routine. But in one quiet house near the edge of town, calm had given way to something far heavier. Where 4-year-old Lunar lived with her uncle and aunt. Ever since her world shattered, her parents, renowned dog trainers known throughout the region, had died suddenly in a car accident. Since that day, Lunar hadn't spoken a single word. The once bright, curious little girl had retreated into silence, her eyes hollow, and her small hands clinging tightly to the memory of what she'd lost. Only 6 German shepherds, the very dogs her parents had lovingly trained, remained steadfast by her side. They were more than pets, they were her only comfort, silently guarding the fragile heart of a girl drowning in grief. Before the accident, Lunar's days had been filled with laughter and energy. Her parents, Henry and Alice, had dedicated their lives to training service dogs. Lunar had grown up surrounded by the sound of barking, the steady rhythm of commands, and the gentle love that radiated from her family. But all of that vanished in a single cruel moment. The crash had left no survivors, and overnight Lunar's home became a hollow shell. The once vibrant little girl stopped speaking altogether. No words, no cries, just an unsettling stillness, which seemed far too heavy for someone so young. Her uncle and aunt, Bella and Finn, did everything they could to fill the void, but grief weighed on them too. They tried to comfort Lunar, but her distant gaze never shifted. Her small voice never returned. The only beings who seemed to reach her were the 6 German shepherds her parents had trained so carefully. Each of them sensed Lunar's sorrow in their own way. They lay beside her bed, followed her silently through the house, resting their heads on her lap. When she sat unmoving by the window, they never demanded. They only stayed watching, waiting, offering quiet company to a girl who felt completely alone. Days turned into weeks and weeks into months. Yet, no matter how much time passed, Lunar remained locked away in her grief. The world outside kept moving. But inside that house, everything stood still for Lunar. The 6 dogs weren't just a memory of her parents. They were her lifeline, the only thread connecting her to the world she had lost. Every morning before the sun fully rose over Sedona, the same scene would quietly unfold in the small house at the end of the street. While Bella and Finn moved about the kitchen preparing a simple breakfast, 6 pairs of attentive eyes were already stationed outside Lunar's door. German shepherds seemed to understand something no one else could, did they? They didn't bark or scratch at the door impatiently. Instead, they waited calm, steady, and loyal. Occasionally, Lunar would crack the door, opening it just enough to see them sitting there, their tails gently swaying. Their presence was a silent invitation, a reminder that she wasn't truly alone. Slowly she began to sit beside them. She wouldn't speak. She rested her small hand on their heads, feeling the warmth of their fur. Beneath her fingertips, each dog had its own unique way of comforting her. Monty, the eldest, pressed his head firmly against her shoulder. Lunar would gently nudge her with her nose until she finally managed the faintest smile. They never rushed her, and never asked for anything more than her company. The house felt lighter. During those brief moments, Lunar's uncle and aunt noticed the subtle changes, the way she seemed to breathe a little easier when the dogs surrounded her, the way her eyes softened when they curled up at her feet for Lunar. The dogs were her constant. They reminded her of her parents without words or pictures. Every trick and every obedient gesture carried echoes of her parents' voices. More importantly, the dogs offered something that even her loving uncle and aunt couldn't fully provide. Day after day, they stood by her, their quiet companionship wrapping around her like a protective shield, patiently waiting for the little girl. They loved to find their way back to themselves. Bella and Finn had always done their best to hold everything together. They were getting old. Their hands often trembled from age. They poured every ounce of strength into creating a safe, stable home for Lunar. But behind closed doors, reality pressed harder each day and bills piled up. On the kitchen table, veterinary costs, food expenses, and utilities, and their savings dwindled faster than they could replenish it for the 6 German shepherds as loyal and beloved as They required more care than their limited income could sustain. Late at night, after Lunar had gone to bed, the couple would sit quietly at a worn dining table, the silence between them heavier than words. Finn would shake his head. His eyes were shining with unshed tears. Bella's hands would clutch her teacup, her heart breaking at the thought of what they would have to tell Lunar. One cold morning, they finally gathered the courage to speak. Lunar was sitting beside the window. One of the dogs was resting its chin on her knee. Finn knelt beside her, his voice soft but strained. "Sweetheart, we've tried everything, but we might have to find new homes for the dogs." For a moment, Lunar didn't react. Her small hand froze mid-stroke against Monty's fur. Then, without a word, she stood up, walked past her uncle and aunt, and disappeared into her room, closing the door quietly behind her. Inside, she curled up beneath her covers. With her back turned to the world, meals went untouched. She didn't emerge, not even when the dogs gently pawed at her door. Outside her room, the 6 German shepherds seemed restless. They paced the hallway, noses pressed against the doors, ears twitching as if they understood every word spoken earlier. They didn't bark or whine, but their usual calm had shifted into something tense. Monty, the leader, would pause by the door longer than the others. His gaze was steady, as though he knew exactly what was happening. Yet whenever Lunar cracked the door open even slightly, they greeted her with the same quiet strength, tails wagging gently, eyes soft, nudging her hand in encouragement. Through something deep within them, they sensed they might not have many days left by her side. None of them showed weakness. Instead, they stood firm, refusing to let their sorrow show, determined to lift Lunar back up, if only for a little while longer. Days passed in silence after Lunar heard the new news. She barely moved from her room. Her small figure curled tightly under the covers as though trying to disappear. Her uncle and aunt knocked gently, leaving food by the door, but nothing seemed to reach. The 6 German shepherds, however, refused to give up. Each morning they would gather outside Lunar's door, sitting patiently waiting. Then one by one, they began bringing her their leashes, gently nudging them against the door, their eyes filled with quiet insistence. At first, Lunar didn't respond, but something about their persistence, their unwavering loyalty, stirred something deep inside her. One morning, she finally opened the door. Monty stood there, leash in his mouth, tail swishing slowly, eyes locked on her without speaking. Lunar reached down, her fingers brushing against his head. She took the leash and then clipped it onto Monty's collar. One by one, she did the same for each of the dogs. Her hands were steady despite the tightness in her chest. Bella and Finn watched from the doorway, unsure of what to say, their hearts aching, yet hopeful, as Lunar quietly led the dogs outside for the first time in days. The park was quiet that morning, dew still glistening on the grass as Lunar walked. All 6 dogs stayed perfectly in sync with her, moving with practiced ease. Her hands were steady despite the tightness in her chest. Bella and Finn watched from the doorway, unsure of what to say, their hearts aching, yet hopeful as Lunar quietly led the dogs outside for the first time in days. The park was quiet that morning, dew still glistening on the grass as Lunar walked. All 6 dogs stayed perfectly in sync with her, moving with practiced ease as though they were one. Passers-by paused, whispering in amazement. It wasn't every day to see a tiny girl calmly leading 6 large, powerful dogs as though they were one. Some people smiled, and others stared. Lunar hardly noticed for the first time in what felt like forever. She breathed in the crisp. She felt the tug of the leashes in her hands and sensed the steady rhythm of the dogs walking beside her with each step. Something heavy inside her began to lift, not entirely but just enough. The dogs didn't look back. They walked confidently, as if saying, "We're still here, you're not alone." The morning air carried a soft chill as Lunar and the dogs strolled deeper into the park. Though she still didn't speak, there was a quiet calm about her, the gentle rhythm of 6 leashes in her hands and the steady presence of her loyal companions beside her. Everything seemed ordinary, until Monty suddenly froze, his ears perked up, body rigid, eyes laser-focused toward the lake at the parks, for example. The other dogs sensed it too, their heads turning in unison, alert but silent. Lunar followed their gaze. A small child no older than 4 had slipped from the grassy bank and tumbled into the water. There was no one nearby paying attention, no parents in sight. The child flailed briefly and then disappeared beneath the surface. Without hesitation, Monty bolted forward, the leash slipping from Lunar's hand. The others followed immediately as if an invisible command had been given. What happened next unfolded so quickly yet so perfectly it left the bystanders speechless. Monty reached the water first. The others followed immediately as if an invisible command had been given. What happened next unfolded so quickly yet so perfectly it left the bystanders speechless. Monty reached the water first, plunging in without a second thought. Right behind him, Rocky and Cooper flanked him on either side. Their powerful bodies cut through the water with practiced ease. On the bank, the remaining 3 dogs spread out, barking sharply, drawing attention, and signaling for help. Under the surface, Monty reached the child, gripped gently onto the back of the toddler's shirt without hurting him. Rocky swam alongside, keeping the child balanced, while Cooper stayed just behind, nudging them toward the shore. The entire sequence felt almost choreographed. Each dog knows exactly what role to play. Years of careful training by Lunar's parents had shaped them into more than pets. They were a team intelligent and disciplined, ready for any situation. Gasps filled the park as the dogs reached the shallow edge carefully, pulling the child onto solid ground within moments. Parkers rushed over. One woman grabbed her phone to call for help, another kneeling beside the crying but safe toddler. Lunar stood frozen, heart pounding, watching her dogs return to her, wet, shivering, but calm. Someone nearby whispered in awe, "Those dogs, they knew exactly what to do." Another murmured, "I've never seen anything like it." In that moment everyone understood these weren't just ordinary people. They were heroes. For a few breathless seconds, no one moved. Parents clutched their children closer. Strangers stared in stunned silence, witnessing something extraordinary. And by the afternoon, the entire town was buzzing. Someone at the park had captured the entire rescue on video, a tiny girl calmly leading 6 powerful dogs without hesitation. Those same dogs springing into action to save a child's life. It didn't take long for the video to spread. First it appeared on local news stations, then it was shared across social media and viewed thousands, then millions of times. People everywhere were stunned not just by the dogs' bravery, but also by their discipline and teamwork. Comments flooded in praising the intelligence of the German shepherds and the incredible composure of the little girl walking them. As soon as more details emerged, admiration turned into something deeper. Reporters dug into the story and learned about Lunar, a girl who hadn't spoken since losing her parents, who now faced the heartbreak of possibly losing the only family. She had left her 6 dogs. Photos of Lunar, quiet and small, standing between the tall protective figures of Monty, Rocky, and the others, which touched hearts. Across the country, people couldn't believe that, after everything, she might be forced to give them up because financial messages poured in as donations trickled. Then flooded with strangers moved by the bond between Lunar and her dogs. Dog lovers' organizations even stepped forward, offering assistance to ensure Lunar would never have to part with her loyal companions. It wasn't just sympathy. It was a shared determination to protect the bond between the little girl and her dogs. Bella and Finn were overwhelmed by the outpouring of kindness. They had spent so many sleepless nights worrying, burdened by what felt like an impossible choice. Now neighbors knocked on their door, offering groceries. Others offered help with vet bills, and local businesses pitched in quietly for Lunar. She still hadn't found her voice. Something inside. She could feel the weight beginning to lift, not only because of her dogs, but also because people cared. The days following the rescue felt like something out of a dream. Everywhere they went, people recognized Lunar and the 6 German shepherds. Neighbors stopped daily bringing treats for the dogs or accessories, and clothes for Lunar. Donations continued, pouring in more than enough to cover the costs of keeping the dogs well fed and healthy. The weight that had hung so heavily over Bella and Finn seemed to melt away overnight. But the most significant change happened quietly inside Lunar. One afternoon the house had finally settled into a peaceful rhythm again. Lunar sat cross-legged on the living room floor. The 6 dogs gathered around her, each lying patiently at her feet. For a long moment, she simply stared at them, her fingers running absently through Monty's fur. Her uncle and aunt watched from the doorway, their hearts filled with cautious hope. And then something incredible happened. For a long, breathless moment, there was only silence, the kind that wraps around a room like a held breath. Lunar's lips parted, and in the softest, almost uncertain voice, she whispered, "Monty." The room seemed to freeze. Monty immediately perked up, ears twitching, his gaze fixed intently on her. Beside him, Rocky gave a small bark as if encouraging her. Lunar swallowed and then said it again, stronger this time. Monty, Rocky, Cooper. She continued, her voice trembling but determined, calling each dog's name one by one. As she spoke, the dogs reacted instantly, tails wagging, as if they understood the enormity of that moment. Tears welled in Beller's eyes. Finn turned away, briefly pretending to wipe something from his face for the first time since losing her parents. Lunar's voice filled the room, not out of fear or sorrow but love. The dogs, sensing the shift, circled her protectively. Some are licking her face, others are pressing their bodies closer as if to say, "We're still here. We're not going anywhere." In that moment, she was surrounded by her loyal companions and the warmth of a community that refused to let her fall. Lunar smiled a real, unguarded smile, and the house that once felt so empty finally felt like home again. And just like that, Lunar's quiet world was filled once more with love, loyalty, and the voices, which she thought she'd lost forever.